Lycopodium powder is hydrophobic, meaning it doesn't mix with water at all. You can cover the surface of a bucket of water with this stuff, dunk your hand inside, and it will come out completely dry. But the most common use for lycopodium powder is in fireworks and explosives. Yet, you can't ignite a pile of it like gunpowder. You can't zap it with an electric charge. Magicians and Hollywood special effects people use it all the time because lycopodium powder is completely inert until you add one ingredient: air. Toss a handful up and air gets between the molecules, just like stacking logs for a campfire. Suddenly, all that potential gets stirred up and you've got more than a spark. You've got a fireball. All you need is a gust of wind. William Ambrose Spicer wasn't born Seventh-day Adventist, but he converted around 14 years old after attending revival meetings and reading the Great Controversy. When he was only 16, he had to drop out of high school to care for his father, who had recently endured a stroke. Spicer needed a job, and he found one at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Young William worked all day and took secretarial courses by night. At 22, he moved to England when former conference president Stephen Haskell offered him a job. Haskell was a missionary to England. But interestingly, England was sending navies, merchants, scientists, and others to the far reaches of Africa and India. Around the world, Western colonialism was spreading. Powerful countries were driven by economic and political gain, ethnocentric beliefs about race superiority, and the thrill of exploration. The motivation to colonize distant lands even got mixed up with religion. And though the reasons for missions were muddied by some, it's undeniable that colonialism helped lay the groundwork for honest, Christ-centered missionaries to reach out in love. At this point, Seventh-day Adventist missions was like a base jumper at the edge of a precipice. So much potential, ready at any second, like a toddler learning to walk, like a handful of lycopodium powder sitting next to a candle, waiting to get shaken up, primed to ignite. And William Spicer was the breeze to do it. The Spicer wind began to blow in 1892 when he was named secretary of the newly minted Foreign Missions Board. Only 1 year later, an African prime minister donated 12,000 acres of farmland to the Adventist Church. This allowed Spicer to establish the Salusi Mission in Zimbabwe, the first of hundreds of African missions. In 1898, Spicer received 2 notices. The first calls for a missionary to Africa, the second to India. After prayer and a family meeting, Spicer accepts the call to India. He becomes a missionary and editor of the first American periodical in India, Oriental Watchman. But Spicer didn't erupt into a gale force until after he returned to the United States several years later. He would serve A.G. Daniels as secretary during Daniels' term as conference president. And then Daniels would return the favor when Spicer became president. Together, these two led the church for the first 30 years of the 20th century. And they would do for Adventist missions what Henry Ford did for the automobile industry. Ford was visiting a meat-packing plant when he realized that all the workers stood still while the product came to them. Why not do the same for cars? Suddenly, the industrial assembly line was born. Infrastructure, groundwork. Around the turn of the century, it became clear that the church's top-down style of government was failing. While appropriate to a small, localized church, this method ceased to be effective as the church stretched across continents and oceans. A.G. Daniels suggested union conferences, handing the responsibilities to locals on the ground, familiar with the specific needs of that region. During the reign of Western imperialism, leaders like Teddy Roosevelt employed battleship diplomacy. In the midst of a nonviolent conflict, one country's naval fleet would show up on the other's shores, posturing all its power. This showmanship was usually enough to resolve the issue in favor of the team with the biggest guns. This mindset infected foreign missions too, and Spicer knew it. He raised the issue of American nationalism, saying, "It does one no good to take along from America a national feeling into the field." Missionaries had too often erected a barrier between himself and every soul who is not an American. William Spicer wrote at least 8 books and never owned a car. He always traveled coach on trains, and he wouldn't buy anything he couldn't pay for in cash. Our Adventist college in India is named for him. Before Spicer in 1880, the church had 8 overseas missions. In 1890, still only 8, but by 1900 there were 42, then 87 in 1910, 153 in 1920, and in 1930, 270 missions in over 50 countries. That's 3 Adventist foreign missionaries for every 1 employed stateside. Spicer stirred the air and the lycopodium powder exploded into flames. The church's membership was growing as numerous as the stars.